so it doesn't annoy the homeowner. So these houses tend to be fresher, and you can just smell the better air quality. You know, it controls the moisture, but it also controls the odors, the VOCs, radon, and any other pollutants that might be in the house at the same time. And so that's another benefit to these houses, is the improved living environment that it's only after living in them for a while, and then you go into another house that doesn't have it, that you can really tell the big difference that's there. So that's important for people that have you know, asthma and other breathing conditions and that sort of thing. And the fifth thing, and it's a feel-good thing, it's good for the environment. We use less energy, we burn less coal to produce our electricity, we consume less natural gas and the CO2 and stuff that goes into the environment, and we hopefully reduce some of the materials that would otherwise go into building the house as well. So for a whole bunch of different reasons, Energy Star houses make a lot of sense, both for in the short term and in the long term. Okay? Building a registered energy efficient home. These are the two paths that are basically out there. We don't have very many R2000 houses being built in Saskatchewan anymore. There's a few builders in Regina that are doing a few, but most of the Saskatoon and northern Saskatchewan builders have moved over to Energy Star. It's just a slightly different, it's more of a prescriptive process to build an energy efficient house compared to R2000, which is a performance-based program. But they deliver a very similar product in the end. The EnerGuide for New Homes process, it's mostly for owner builders located in Saskatchewan. And as I indicated, we typically would do an analysis of your house from the plans and specs before you start construction. And so that's where we calculate the wall areas, we simulate the construction types and things like that. And then we give feedback to the builder as to where it sits on the rating scale and where the energy is going. You can see pretty quickly from the reports that the software generates that 30% of the energy is being lost to the main walls. Or if you upgraded the furnace or you upgraded the HRV, here would be the potential savings both in gigajoules and in dollars per year, because we have costing in there which will simulate what the utility costs are going to be as well. Okay? So before you even start construction, the builder, the homeowner, whoever it happens to be, can make some decisions about maybe changing the specifications, because the returns may be very high. The savings might be high for very little input as far as the construction costs go or the capital costs go. So we do that analysis typically before you even start construction from the plans. Once the house is done, and we go back and we verify how much insulation is there, is the equipment that we modeled in place, the furnace, the water heater, the HRV, are the windows, the double OE argons, or the triple double OE, or whatever we modeled up front. And we do an air tightness test, and we bring it back, and then we recreate that electronic file in the as-built condition with the real numbers. Up front, we take an estimate as to what the air leakage is, and we simulate the furnace and things like that. This is the as-built file now, and that way we can produce then a final rating of the house with an actual rating label that the federal government controls, and we submit the files to Ottawa, and they get audited, and that house is in a national database as well that Natural Resources Canada controls and monitors and checks out. And in Saskatchewan, there is currently some incentives for new homes as well. For new homes, there's no incentives from the federal government. They simply manage the whole process, the software, the registration of the houses, and the registration and licensing of the builders and that type of thing. But in Saskatchewan, there's a small incentive right now for new homes, and you can take advantage of that if your house rate's 80 or higher. That's deemed to be the threshold of an energy efficient house. Okay, so that's a rating program only. On the right-hand side is the Energy Star process. And it's basically for home builders, because you need to be trained and licensed to do that, although a homeowner building it could go down that road as well if they really wanted to. And it involves training and certification and licensing. So you need to go through a 1 to 2 day training course and some on-site mentoring to get started. Then you need to register your houses, and you need to build them to the Energy Star standard, which is detailed specs on the attic insulation, wall insulation, windows and mechanicals and everything else like that. At completion, we'll come back out and again we'll air test the house to verify how tight and leaky it is, and we'll verify all the equipment that's gone into it. And at that point in time, we can then submit the files to Ottawa, and once they get accepted, the house gets labeled, and it'll have the Energy Star label. Every house has a unique ID to it. The label has a unique ID, and the house itself has a unique ID. It's a 10-digit number that can be tracked by the database in Ottawa. And so that gives some assurance to the customer that you've got what you buy. That if the builder is selling you an Energy Star house, this is verification that it meets this national standard, and it's been independently verified by this third party. Okay. And again, just like with the EnerGuide for New Homes rating, here you need to rate an 80 to get the incentive. Here, your house has to be labeled as being Energy Star, which is approximately 80 on the rating scale as well. So again, pretty equivalent as far as the energy features and energy consumption goes. It's just how they get there is slightly different. Something new that came to Saskatchewan and to Canada for that matter about 2 years ago, give or take, I think it's 2 years ago, is LEED for new homes. It had been in the United States for a few years prior to this. We typically have heard of LEEDs in the past, but it was typically for commercial and industrial buildings. It's now been expanded or carried over into the new, into the home side of things. And it is, Sunridge also does this, and the LEED program involves a bunch of different areas, components, whatever you want to call it, and they're up on the screen here. One is innovation and design process. That means integration of a whole bunch of partners in that planning process, from the builder to the trades to the owner to everybody that's involved. It's got an indoor air quality component to it. Location and community is how close or far is it from services and how much driving needs to be done, or is there public transport and other things like that. Materials and resource use, water efficiency, energy efficiency, site sustainability, and awareness and education. So there's 8 components to the LEED process. Within each of those components, there's certain mandatory things that need to be done, and then there's additional optional things that you do, and you gain points for some of the different things that you do. LEED for homes have 4 different levels to it. One is just certified, then it's silver, gold, and platinum. And you need more points the farther up you go. And it's pretty hard to get to platinum, and I understand that this house is trying to get to platinum, and hopefully it'll get there. We've heard from the national people that many houses never do get labeled, and oftentimes somebody will be shooting for gold and ends up having to back off to silver because they couldn't get some of the verifications, and there's a lot of independent verification for lots of these things that are out there. As I mentioned earlier on, energy efficiency is one of them, and that's where the rating system comes into it again. Is that I believe the minimum rating for LEED is 77, I'm just off the top of my, in the high 70s anyway is a starting point, and then for each point that you achieve higher than that, you get additional points. And so that's how the energy side of it works, okay? And then there's things there for water efficiency, and that's got to do with landscaping and drip irrigation and storage of water, of rainwater and other things like that. So there's 8 different categories, and you need to do certain things in each of them, and then you do additional things to gather extra points. And like I said, the more points you get, the higher up the scale you get, from certified to silver to gold to platinum. And that pretty much wraps it up. So we talked about the rating system out there, and most of the houses that are being built are Energy Star for new homes, because most of the houses are built by builders. But for somebody building their own house, there's always that rating system, which is EnerGuide for new homes. And there's also the LEED for new homes as well, if somebody wants to go even beyond that. And most of the LEED homes are not not to the equilibrium level necessarily, but they're certainly beyond what would be typically out there in the marketplace. Plus they have a whole bunch of different features to them as well, from materials conservation to basically from the environmental perspectives for lots of it. And Sunridge is involved in all 4 of those programs. Basically independent auditors that we've been trained and licensed to be doing the analysis, the verifications, the inspections, and everything else that goes with all of those different programs. And again, there are incentives provincially for most of them, if not all of them, depending on what level you achieve when you go through the rating process. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Yes.
I've got a few.
Yes.
So at one point you mentioned that retrofitting with HRV is difficult.
The reason for that is that many times, most existing houses have exhaust-only ventilation systems. By that I mean we have a bathroom fan with an on-off switch and it just vents directly outside all 3 of the bathrooms or whatever there's in the house. The kitchen usually will have an exhausting range hood that goes directly outside. The way a balanced heat recovery ventilation system works is that usually it draws air from those different rooms, the bathrooms and the kitchen, and exhausts it outside, and then brings an equivalent amount of fresh air back in, and it passes the 2 air streams without mixing them, but it steals the energy or exchanges the energy that's there. The problem in an existing house is how do you get ducting from the HRV that's in the basement back up to the bathrooms and the kitchen? Because everything's now finished off. So how do you get the pipe work up there and make that work, and then how do you distribute the air? Because usually an HRV ventilation system uses a forced air furnace to distribute the ventilation air. So the fresh air that HRV brings in is typically dumped into the return air of the furnace, then the furnace fan is used to, and the duct